EDU-ARCTIC 2, Polar Research for Education, innovative program in Poland and Norway. Webinars.
Introductory, I will give this presentation now. Svalbard. Many people think that Svalbard is located at the North Pole, but it's not true. If you see the northern hemisphere in the middle, there's the North Pole here. And some 1,200 kilometers south from the North Pole, there is Svalbard, the archipelago. This archipelago includes all islands between latitude 74 and 81 degrees north, and between longitude 10 to 35 degrees east. The biggest island of this archipelago is Spitsbergen, and sometimes people confuse those two names, Svalbard, but Svalbard is archipelago, and Spitsbergen, the island. Some people think that Spitsbergen is archipelago, but it's not true. That's the biggest island of this archipelago. If you would see the Svalbard from above, you would be surprised how highly glaciated it is. There's many huge glaciers that terminate in the sea. There's plenty of glaciers that terminate on land. And there's just some bare areas without ice where you can find mountains, valleys, and glacially eroded fjord systems. The highest mountain of Svalbard is Newtontoppen, and it's 1,717 meters above sea level. What about the climate? The climate is highly influenced by ocean currents. To the west, there is West Spitsbergen Current, which is a branch of the Gulf Stream that brings relatively warm water and changes the climate there. It's much warmer than at the same latitude in Greenland, for example. East of Spitsbergen, there is East Spitsbergen Current that brings colder water masses with a lot of drift ice from the Arctic Ocean in the North Pole Basin, making the eastern part of the archipelago colder, with much heavier ice conditions. So it's not that easy to reach the east part of Svalbard. Usually when people go around Svalbard by yachts, in some years it's not possible, but recently there's less and less sea ice, so it is possible, but only in recent decades. Mean annual temperature for Spitsbergen is around -6 degrees. And I'm saying Spitsbergen because that's the biggest island, and there's multiple different islands with different meteorological stations. So for example, to the south where the Bjorn Island is located, it would be much warmer. But for Spitsbergen, it's around -6 degrees throughout the average temperature. The warmest month is July, with temperatures oscillating around +5 degrees. During winter and spring, temperatures are around -15, -12 degrees. And there is low annual sum of precipitation, but it varies. To the west, where the West Spitsbergen current is influencing, there is higher precipitation, around 500 millimeters. In central and northeastern part, the precipitation is much lower, and it's around 200 millimeters. So it's really low. I'll be showing you different pictures that I took throughout my expeditions to Spitsbergen. For the last 12 years, I've been traveling there almost every year. And on the pictures, you will see usually great conditions, because this is when you are able to take beautiful photos. But usually the weather conditions are pretty harsh. There is strong wind, low temperatures, and actually it's not that pleasant as it may seem from further pictures that I will show you. Just have in mind, it's high Arctic, it's far north, so the weather conditions are pretty harsh. There's a question, what's the best time to visit? Depending on what you expect to see. If you love to see northern lights, the best time to go is during polar night that lasts from the end of October till the beginning of February. So during, this time it's dark, but there is northern lights on the sky. If you want to drive snowmobile, the best conditions would be during springtime. And during springtime, there is lots of snow. All the tundra is covered by snow, so you can travel around on skis or on snowmobile. If you prefer to walk around to see green blooming flowers and wildlife, for example, millions of birds that come only for the summer, it's better to go during the summer. Each season is different. Each season is characterized by different temperatures, different wildlife that comes, and the views are different. Each day in Svalbard is actually different. So depends on what you expect and you want to see. The name Svalbard comes from old legends. Svalbardi Fundin, that means frozen shores. And probably Svalbard was found by the Vikings, but there's no hard evidence for that. But later in the 15th century, there were Pomors, hunters and fishermen from the White Sea coast of Russia. They knew Spitsbergen as a good hunting ground before it was officially discovered, because the official discovery of Svalbard was made by expedition led by Dutchman Willem Barents in 1596. And this expedition, at the end of the 16th century, gave the information to whole Europe about the environment, about the abundance of wildlife there. And this is how the whalers appeared in Svalbard. After this journey, whaling started in Spitsbergen in nearshore waters. There were thousands and millions actually of different species, and whales were hunted by those whalers. They were flensed. Blubber was brought to the whaling station and boiled in large copper pots. First, those copper pots were on land, but soon it became the fjords became empty. There were no whales because they were hunted. They didn't come back. So ships had to go further and further to the sea. So then they put the copper pots on the ships. And why they were hunting whales? Because they needed oil, and the oil was used for example, lamps. All these years of intensive hunting had almost led to the extinction of whales in Svalbard. Even now you can see remnants of this era. On shores of, for example, Hornsund Fjord, there is, for example, lots of skulls from the whaling station, as you can see on the picture to the right. But the whaling stopped. It was the species became endangered, so they become protected. And recently, we observed that more and more whales are coming back to Svalbard. So, for example, people take pictures now as they're tourists. They observe humpback whales, as on this picture, blue whales, orcas, dolphins, bowhead whales, and lots of other whales that are that appeared especially during summer. Some of them stay throughout the year. But after those whalers left, because there were no whales in the surroundings of Svalbard, hunters came. And their primary target was to catch as many polar foxes and bears as possible to sell their fur. They were selling this fur in Norway and also in different countries, but those hunters came from Norway. And they also collected down from eider ducks. Down was used for, like pillows, or recently down is used as a filling in your warm down jackets. Reindeers and seals and ptarmigans were mostly taken for local use because their meat was not so good for selling, but to live in Svalbard, they were hunted because they were needed. The meat was eaten by those hunters. And the reason for overwintering of all these hunters, because they stay overwinter, was that only the winter fur brought good profit, because the summer fur is comparatively worthless. So as you can see, for example, in the case of polar fox, Arctic fox during summer in the upper picture and Arctic fox during winter. So as you can imagine, those foxes were hunted during winter because of their fur. Now it's actually not happening, and foxes are protected. Polar bears are protected by law since 1973 in Svalbard, and this year finished all the hunting on bears. Before, during a year, there were hundreds of bears killed by hunters. The scientific expeditions that came to Svalbard in the end of the 19th century started new era for Svalbard. And it's ongoing. There's plenty of scientists coming every year and living there in Svalbard just for pure scientific reasons. For example, in 1882, 1883, there was International Polar Year, and the station was established by Sweden in Cap Tortzen, as you can see on the picture to the left. The expedition from 1899 to 1904 was led by Swedes and Russians. The expedition was called the Ark of Meridian Expedition, and it was to define the shape of the Earth by means of very precise astronomical determination of latitude and longitude, as well as topographic work. You can look for more details in the internet about the Ark of Meridian expedition. It was very successful, and there's plenty of information on the internet, more than I can give now during this presentation. Svalbard was also a great place to start the attempt to reach the North Pole, and there were many attempts. One of them was very tragic in 1897, led by Andre. They tried to reach the North Pole by balloon. And they actually, for many years, they disappeared. After more than 30 years, they were found all dead in Kvitøya, one of the islands of Svalbard. No one knew for the 30 years where they were gone. But there was Norge, the airship that carried out the first verified trip to the North Pole, and likely the first verified overflight on the 12th of May, 1926. It started in Ny-Ålesund, and it reached North Pole on that day. Here is a map of protected areas. I mentioned that many species became protected, but also the environment is protected. The greenish color shows the national park. The purple one, nature reserves. There's also geotop protection areas. And you can see most of Svalbard is covered and protected. The mining in the 20th century began because of the industrial revolution that rolled over Europe. And countries that were fastly developing, they demanded large amounts of raw materials, especially coal. So the prices for coal became very high. And Svalbard was like a magnet to adventurous people looking for huge profit because there is coal in Svalbard. As in the beginning of the 20th century, Svalbard was no man's land. So no country there were many countries there that were fighting for the areas. And actually there were some occupations by different countries on different parts of Svalbard. And it was quite chaotic until 1920, when the Svalbard Treaty was signed. It was signed in Paris, and it put Svalbard and Spitsbergen under Norwegian administration and sovereignty, but guaranteed free access for all citizens that signed the treaty. And this area is also delimitarized. That means there's no troops there, military troops. Several additional nations acceded the treaty after it was ratified in 1920. For example, Poland signed this treaty in 1932. And recently there's around 46 countries that signed the treaty, and all of them have the same rights that are governed by Norway. So they have freedom of scientific exploratory and tourist activities. And Svalbard is visa-free. So you can go to Svalbard, you can visit, for example, its capital city, Longyearbyen. There is also Russian town, Barentsburg, international scientific station in Ny-Ålesund. There's plenty of different nations. They have own stations in Ny-Ålesund, and there's Polish Polar Station in Hornsund. And those are permanently inhabited places. So there's people for whole year, and it's been like that for many years. This is how Longyearbyen looks like. There is airport, easily reachable every day. There is flights from Oslo in Norway and from Tromsø in Norway. So every day you can go to Longyearbyen. There is a question I can see somewhere. But let's go back to the presentation. I'll be answering questions later, as I have much to say for you. Longyear City was founded in 1906 by American Joe Munro Longyear, and today there is Sysselmannen, so the administrator, and whole administration is located in Longyearbyen. There is also university, hospital, supermarket, hotels, range of shops for tourists, of course, bars, restaurants, and other services. So if you go there, you are in the middle of the Arctic, but you can, buy souvenirs and stuff, and you can enjoy different trips provided by guided tours. The population of Longyearbyen is growing, and it's around 2,000 people for the whole year. Fluctuation is high, as many inhabitants complete a contract lasting for 2 or 3 years, and then they return home to Norway or elsewhere. Longyearbyen is really international. There's more than 50 nationalities in Longyearbyen, as it is if it's visa-free. So everyone can come and try to find a job in Longyearbyen. And many of my friends work there as guides for tourists, and also at the university that you can see in the upper part of this picture, a huge building on the top. This is how the Sysselmannen, governor's office of Svalbard, looks like to the left. There is building of the university. All the buildings and all the constructions are set on the piles that are drilled into the frozen ground, because there is permafrost underneath. In Longyearbyen, if you go there, it's maybe not funny, but something weird to see. Everywhere on the banks, on the post office, on supermarket, you can see you are not allowed to carry rifle inside. And for Svalbard, it is normal to carry rifle, because it's forbidden to go outside the city without the rifle, but it's forbidden to bring it, especially loaded, to inside shops and banks, for well-known reason, I think. This picture shows Barentsburg, the Russian mining city. It's the second largest settlement of Svalbard, and the mining is conducted by the company Arctic Eagle since 1932. And this is also the place where all the Russian activities, most of Russian activities in science happens. So this is the center. In the past, there were also other settlements, the Russian settlements, in Pyramiden, that was closed in 1998, and Grumandien, that was closed in 1962, because they stopped the mines. They left the mines. There was no. It was too expensive to extract the coal in these places, so they abandoned these settlements. You can see Pyramiden, the abandoned city I mentioned, on the pictures here. Ny-Ålesund, located in northwest, and this is where many nations have scientific stations. It used to be a coal mine also till the 60s of the 20th century, and recently it's the International Center for Research, with a mix of old buildings from the mining time, and also new buildings of the new stations. And there's plenty of stations there from Italy, Netherlands, China, UK, France, South Korea, Italy, India, Japan, Germany, Norway, France. And there's also scientists coming from different countries as well. So as you can see, it's very international. To the south, there is Polish Polar Station that was built in 1957. And since 1978, the research is conducted whole year round. There are expeditions that are sent every year just to conduct monitoring of different things. The station is managed by my institute where I work, and I used to work there as a meteorologist. And recently, I'm responsible for meteorological monitoring, so I coordinate this monitoring. But there's meteo-hydroglacio-seismological monitoring, and that's the responsibility of members of subsequent expeditions. Usually it's around 10 people. And this is how the building in Warsaw looks like. And usually I work here, but today I'll be there in an hour, I think, because I stayed home to give you this presentation. There is no diversity in species in Svalbard because of the extreme conditions. Those species that live there had to adapt. The greatest challenge is to get enough food for survival and reproduction. As you can see, there's not no many plants, no trees. So actually only grazing on moss, on tundra is possible for reindeers. But as there's reindeers and also whales, seals, and different species, carnivores also live there, and the biggest one is polar bear. And wildlife diversity peaks when the migratory birds return to breed during summer. So during summer, there's thousands and millions of birds, such as, I will just show you, gulls, fulmars, auks, terns, skuas, puffins, kittiwakes, geese, guillemots, eiders, sandpiper gulls, fulmars, and others. So all those birds come for summer only, but there is one species that stays for the winter, and that's a rock ptarmigan that is visible on the left picture. Polar bears hunt on the sea, reindeers and foxes stay on land for a whole year. Of all mammals, there's a total of 19 species of marine mammals and only 2 species of terrestrial mammals in Svalbard. Those I mentioned before are Svalbard reindeer and Arctic fox, and marine mammals include bears, polar bears that hunt on seas, so they are called marine mammals, walruses, narwhals, white and bowhead whales, and they stay for whole year. And there's also plenty of different whales that come only for summer, like blue whales, orcas, and dolphins. Here to the left, you can see walrus and some whales to the right. I mentioned about birds, so it's really noisy during summer when they come to breed to Svalbard. During winter, it's, calm and silent. As I said, 60% of Svalbard is glaciated, but there is also tundra there that blooms during summer. The plant growth and distribution is limited due to large temperature fluctuations, as I said. Fluctuations from -30 during winter, that's the lowest temperature expected. But during winter and spring, it's around -15. During summer, it's up to +5 on average. But there are also warmer days. This year, the highest temperature was recorded, and it was above 22 degrees in Longyearbyen. Trees and shrubs in Svalbard are absent. But during summer, flowering ground vegetation, the dense moss tundra in valleys, and lush green vegetation under bird cliffs are astonishing. Those are really beautiful, and trust me, I've seen that. On this picture, I will just show you two different flowers, Dryas octopetala and purple saxifrage. But that's just example. If you see the blooming flowers on tundra, it's really amazing. But they bloom only in June and shortly in July. Then they just turn brown in August. For my work, I'm a scientist, and what I showed you is just picture what I saw around me when I was visiting Svalbard. And actually, this package will include those, pictures, tasks, games, but also more information that I didn't provide during this presentation. But it will include also my scientific work. And the motivation for my work is that Arctic regions are highly impacted by the ongoing climate change, and those ecosystems are very sensitive. So for us scientists, very interesting. They lie in pristine and remote environments, far from direct anthropogenic impact. So the recognition of the system, all these systems, allows us to understand the impacts of consequences of climate change. As it's natural environment, it's very interesting what's going on there. It's not influenced directly by people, but indirectly it is, because people change the climate. In Hornsund, as I mentioned before, I am responsible and I coordinate this meteorological monitoring there. We have data since 1978. So pretty long period, more than 40 years. And that's something you can find in my publications. Oh, sorry, something happened with the presentation. I clicked somewhere in the wrong place. And what we see in Hornsund is warming in the last 40 years. The annual average air temperature changed by 4.5 degrees. That's very high. That's 1.14 degrees per decade. So the whole globe, on average, the global change is around 0.17 per decade. There is almost 6 times more. That's really high. And that influences all the environment. Higher air temperatures, because of that, the glaciers melt, the snow cover lasts shorter, and it influences everything in Svalbard. The amount of precipitation is also changing. It used to be lower, but recently there is increasing trend. In the last 40 years, in Hornsund, for example, the precipitation changed and it's higher by almost 250 millimeters than it used to be in the 80s. So you can imagine more liquid precipitation, because it comes as rain mainly, also influences the glaciers and all the environment. You can find, of course, my publications on the internet, but these are scientific papers that I published. Those are on sea ice extent, on changes in river functioning, thermal regime of permafrost, how the hydrology changes, and how the glaciers also changed. I'm a scientist for last few years, so there's plenty of papers that I already published, and I highly recommend. But remember, those are scientific papers, so I'm not sure it will be easy for you to read them. But hopefully, if you're interested enough, you will learn more about Svalbard, and you can find many publications, because science is ongoing process, and there's many scientific questions that we'll still have. As for now, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Watch other recordings from webinars on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/EDU-ARCTIC. EDU-ARCTIC 2. From polar research to scientific passion, innovative nature education in Poland and Norway receives a grant of 240,000 euros received from Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway under EEA funds.